Will Goggins Grumke.
He's been wanting to introduce you that way for a while.
I was going to say, that was rehearsed. That was good. That was
Will
good.
Goggins Grumke, the single greatest athlete employee we've ever had. And that dates back far and wide. We've had over 1,000 people work here, without a doubt. I mean, thousands.
Yeah.
By far our best.
I'm sitting right here, dude. I've already challenged Will in previous life to fitness competition.
We'll have to bring that one up at some point.
Which one?
Yeah, that is
some CrossFit 314 days?
Oh, yeah.
Or
Yeah.
Well, good news is I heard you guys doing a High Rocks, Dallas, fall.
That's this guy.
Yep.
No, you're partner. I need a partner.
Actually, I did hear it was both you guys.
There's a partner.
In it together.
Come on,
That's
dude.
new. We did sign up for something called the Midnight Mile. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
It's a cool concept. So we've had a couple of run clubs on the podcast, and they had this really fun idea. And they're always, cooking up new ways to do a run, right, for a benefit. But they do this Midnight Mile where you say the time that you absolutely for sure think you can run a mile in. You try to start your mile to where you are literally crossing the finish line at the stroke of midnight.
Yeah.
And so if you say, for example, I'm going to start at 11:54 p.m., like you better run a 6-minute mile, right? And so like everybody is starting at the totally different time, but everybody's supposed to finish at the exact same time. So the finish line shot is like legendary.
Yeah. I mean, it has to be a super wide finish line, though.
Mm-hmm. You think?
It depends on how many people are showing up for this thing.
Yeah. But I thought it was just a fun, unique idea.
Running clubs in Kansas City are intense. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you guys have a lot of them here?
We have a couple.
You ever get in on them?
I haven't yet.
Yeah.
It's not really something that I've jumped into. I don't think people want to run at 5 a.m. I don't know many run clubs that's like 5 a.m. kickoff. So
is a 1P run club something you guys have kicked around the idea of actually it's a lot to obviously adopt, but have you guys thought about doing it?
Yeah, I mean, we've thought about it. We got a guy, Mason Stevens, out of Texas that he kind of runs the 1P run club, but it's nothing really super official because he does such a great job with just getting into the community, activating it, being a part of it, that he's really a good representation. But yeah, to run it the right way and have like a standard and set times and all the different things, like it's just not something that we've poured into yet. So
for sure,
dude. For our listeners, I want to make sure we cover this first, and that is, Will, we've known you for over 10 years, man. It's been genuinely so rewarding to watch your growth as a man, just as a person. Employee or not, just growth as a man. And one of those things I want to highlight is just who you were when you got hired versus who you are now. And it's wild to be around people. We forget kind of how privileged we were to be around you at the very beginning of your career, and it's like no one can imagine you not being who you are today, right? And that path that you've taken over this last decade, and it's at a decade plus now.
Yeah, I think June. I think it's like June 12th will be 13 years or 12 years. Yeah, 12
Sweet
years.
baby Jay.
we're all getting old.
That's the truth.
I'm aging backwards. Okay, we already
That
covered
is
this.
true.
Yeah.
That is true. You're going backwards.
Okay.
Yeah.
That I mean, truly though, like it's crazy. Like we are getting old, where it's like we are multiple generations away from what would be I guess years where you had to grind, where there was a whole lot of belief at the foundation of what you were doing on a day-to-day basis, because the payoff was not something you could visibly see, right? And for so many of this generation, talking about Gen Z, so many do not want to practice that delayed gratification. What has been the biggest challenge for you? What comes to mind, I guess, top of mind for you as far as challenges go when you're managing these young people now? When you feel like at times where you feel like kind of that coming across like a grandpa, like back in my day, I used to have to walk to school, 15 miles uphill. Yeah. And having to explain to people like kind of what it takes, and them feeling like that shouldn't be what it takes. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it's definitely been a challenge, and even, with my own journey working through it and having to go from someone that was very unconfident, and really didn't have a lot of belief in myself to, building that. And I required so much on external motivation for me to take actions. That learning to build intrinsic internal motivation, I think, is one of the things that most people need to work on, especially in the younger generation, coming up, because of the world that they lived in. They saw things faster. The world is evolving faster. You have more access to more people, and of course, people are going to put their best things on the internet to inflate their own ego or to just show those parts of their life off. So like, that is what their perception is in a lot of different ways. And so we can't, look at them and fault them for that necessarily, but coming back to like teaching like the reality of the situation and understanding that like, hey, you're going to have to work extremely hard over a long period of time to get the things that you see, and one of the things that I talk with a lot of people is, how much money that they earn or the lifestyle that they want to live. And they look at people and they forget that that person's like, 30 or late 30s or 40s, and they're like 20. And it's like, hey, you understand that they've been working for 15 years or 20 years to earn the money that they are earning right now. And I understand that you want that lifestyle, you think that it's cool, but you're 1 or 2 years in, or like they look at their parents and their parents, might be doing well or retiring or, and maybe they had investments or whatever. And it all comes back to the time component that is that hardest piece to understand of like, hey, one, we got to build some internal, intrinsic motivation so that you will push through any of the hard times, but also the time aspect of it is the, biggest obstacle to overcome, I think, in, trying to teach and develop. So.
Yeah. Something I tell our guys all the time too, is that, I wasn't born rich. I'm not, overly, intelligent, and I also, so it's like when you think about it, what are the things you have available to you? You have time and you have grit, and that's what most people that come into our company are in that boat, where it's like, you have time and you have grit. Those are the things you can invest into, and that's the way that you kind of level up, And a lot of people don't like the time thing. You know what I'm saying? They want it quick.
Yep.
I want it quick.
Well, I
so
think
tell sorry to cut you off.
No,
I was going to say, for our listeners that might not be familiar with you, how did you come into the company? Explain the early days of
and
Will
just like,
Grumke.
who were you when you come on too? What was kind of like?
I looked back at pictures of you were chubbier back then.
Yeah, I was definitely chubbier. Yeah. I actually think I think I look older back then because I was not taking care of myself.
Yeah.
With the amount of drinking and partying and different things going on in my life that I was like, oh man, I looked rough.
Yeah.
But really, I would say my journey started as a customer. I walked into a Supplement Superstores in Chesterfield Valley, here in Missouri, and I was at that point in my life where I'd feel like I'd tried every magic pill, every potion, every diet, because I lost 50 pounds, but it was all the wrong ways, and I looked horrible. I didn't feel good, and really I felt hopeless. Going from I used to be the fat kid. But now, how am I ever going to live a healthy, active lifestyle? Or for me, I wanted to look like the Under Armour mannequins at Dick's Sporting Goods, just super jacked. And I was like, man, how do I look?
They were the most jacked mannequins.
Yeah,
we got to
sure.
We got to bring it up. No one had ever seen a mannequin look like that until Under Armour came out.
Stacked.
The guy that was protecting the house.
Exactly.
Yeah, dude. You're like,
I want to look like that.
Yeah.
But it didn't look anything like it, and I didn't have a whole lot of hope. And I didn't even know what S2 was, at the time. But I saw the sign kind of off to the left-hand side of the highway, drove in. And at that moment, I got set up with a nutrition plan, walked out with Formula One, Ignition, and M Factor Hero, so post-workout stack and a multivitamin. And I remember feeling like, all right, I got a little bit of hope here. I feel like I actually have a plan that I can execute on because all the other stuff that I was trying to do by myself wasn't working. And, right away started feeling a little bit better, started noticing a little bit more. I was still, back at school and over 3 years just building a relationship with the guys there, and starting to get a little, more confidence in myself and in my own results. Going through the interview process to find a job after school, Tyler Fox was like, hey, man, you ever thought about working here? And I was like, no, man, I'm not smart enough, because I was going to school to be a third grade teacher, specifically third grade, because I didn't want the responsibility of having to teach kids how to read in kindergarten, first grade, and second grade, because I didn't think that I could live up to that expectation. That's where I was at with my confidence in life of I can't even teach kids how to read.
You weren't worthy of doing that.
Right.
I couldn't possibly, you weren't capable.
Yeah, and I didn't want to man, what if I mess them up? Because I wasn't the world's best reader and still, have my challenges to this day. That I picked third grade because I didn't want to go too high, because then it's like, oh man, then you got higher level mathematics and things like that. And Tyler's like, dude, we can teach you all the stuff, we can teach you the information that you need to learn. I really think you should apply. So I went through the interview process and didn't know anything, really about the trajectory of Supplement Superstores, First Form, any of that. And was one of the last people that Andy interviewed for the third, interview process, and getting to hear about the vision of the company of Supplement Superstores and, First Form and other things that were going on and what he wanted to do and the impact that he wanted to make. And, I remember sitting there thinking dude, I can get behind that because I will have an opportunity to help, the lost, used to be fat kids and figure out a direction. Because even at that point, I was starting to get a little bit, more momentum in my life. And I was like, I want to do this. I want to help people. And so got the job and walked across the stage on Saturday, started working on Sunday. And, then at S2, really just tried to work every event that I could, learn everything that I could. Drove down to, Springfield with Jeff to learn underneath all the top performing managers and just try to soak up as much information as possible because I didn't know anything,
At the time, though, I want to make clear, like no one was telling you to do any of this.
Correct.
And so, like,
where'd that come from?
You had this innate thought of like, at the time, so everybody understands, like, this is a very exciting time in our company. Andy was working directly with everybody at Supplement Superstores, and he was painting the picture that a lot of people see today, but none of it had been painted yet. It had just been all words, right? It all was words at the time. And, there was some, like, if you're a young person, just like we're talking about with, people who have a hard time with thinking about the constraints of time and their journey of how, having to grow within the career, you had 20, 30 people that were ahead of you, in quotes, right, in line for trying to pursue the same dream that you were pursuing. And, there was a time when I thought Kyle was like super eager and, he was 3 years behind me. And I was like, man, there's just you're going to be waiting a long time. In my head, that's what I was thinking. Like that was my negative, I guess, thought process. And so, for you to come in and try to like steamroll competition in the sense of I'm going to outwork everybody is very admirable. And, where do you feel like that came from? Because it's like, it's almost like you were, too dumb to quit, if you will, or like, what I mean? Like just didn't know any better.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, part of that had just come from all the struggles, with my own fitness and, life in general. And I just always wanted to fit in, quite honestly. Like when I really unpack it and look back, I wanted to be valuable. I wanted people to like me. And I've always had a very strong sense of team, right? Because even though I was unconfident as an individual and very much introverted, like I wanted to be a part of something that meant more. And seeing that as an opportunity of like, hey, I can do something here, and I feel that I can help in this regard. And I committed to 1 year. Like that's the thing is like I committed to give it everything that I had for 1 year. And that's actually how I got through a horrible college football career where we won 4 games in 4 years. So let me tell you, went from a high school where we won all the time to getting our ass beat all the time. That taught me a lot of life lessons as well. And I kept showing up for the fight, and I kept showing up for the fight, and I would commit to another year. And so I used that same methodology of like, okay, I'm going to give it everything I got for 1 year. And at least at this point, I don't have to worry about 10 other dudes on the field on defense, right? I can worry about myself, and I know that the value is going to be added to the company in some capacity. And similar to kids these days, like I wanted, the elaborate life, and I wanted it fast. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to work as hard as I can for 1 year. And, even though that was my, initial thought, you start building the momentum in your life where you're like 6 months in. And like, hey, I'm starting to get a little traction here. I'm starting to learn a little bit. I'm starting to have more fun. I'm actually being fulfilled, like, because at the time wasn't making a whole lot of money, but I was making a whole lot of experiences that were like cool to have. And so it kept me going. And then it was like, all right, I'm going to commit to another year. And that personally is how I had to really break it down. But out of the gate, it was a lot from the ego of like, I just wanted to be valuable. I wanted to be a part of the team. I wanted to have a worth. And so I just ran at it as fast as I could. Knowing that eventually, I could make myself into something.
You had like, and so like, I could just echo all of what Will's saying. That is 100% true. I could see all of that. I worked 3 hours away from Will down in Springfield, Missouri. He was up in the St. Louis area. But we kept hearing about, this guy that was just out working everybody. But I want to also make mention,
quite a few go the extra miles during that time,
including the annual Going the Extra Mile Award, which we did for a year. Shout out, $5,000 you won on that, which you immediately gave back. Yeah.
Well, Drew's guy was like, well, after taxes, it's only X amount. And I was like, bro,
dude, can you not, Drew? Yeah. Can you not?
The day you won it, he told you that too. Of course.
Literally, like right after we all broke from like cheering and celebrating, he's like, well, it's only this much. I'm like.
It's actually like 3,200 after taxes. But no, man, like, and we'll get to that story, what you did there. But like, there's so much to say about in a time where when you're a young person, everybody's chomping at the bit to matter on a big level, like you were wanting to do. Like, I want to create a big impact within this company. I want to make sure that, I'm leaving some kind of a footprint here. And when you did that, I would just want to mention that like, there was never any like ego involved with you where, you were never to like get noticed. You were never like stomping on anybody else. You were never trying to show anybody else up. You weren't, publicly calling out people who weren't doing the work. You would bring them to the side. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, the way that you're able to work on a team was very admirable as well. Did you get that from the college football days, or did that happen at a younger age? Just you've never been the teammate that's like trying to show up as a selfish person. You know what I mean? It's like so uncommon in young people.
Yeah, and I would say, if I really look back at it and understand where that root feeling, comes from, it's I didn't like confrontation, right? And so again, I never wanted people. I couldn't have like a tough conversation, or I didn't like confrontation. Even though I would end up in like fights and altercations and stuff like that as a kid. Like there was no like having a conversation. I would either just stay away from it, or I couldn't control my emotion, and we would physically fight. And so for me, like even though it would eat at me internally of like, oh, I should say something. Quite honestly, I was too much of a coward to be able to express that and bring that up and like have a conversation with an individual about like, hey, dude, you're letting the standard down here, or hey, whatever. And it's like I'll just run as fast as I can. I'll just make up for their mistake. I'll just do what I can. I'll clean the store. I'll do whatever. And that's where it was in the beginning. Now over time, I've learned how to have conversations, and they're not nearly as bad as we build them up in our head. But that's really how it got started, is like, hey, I'll just keep doing more and keep doing more until I learned to have the boundaries and to be able to have the conversation and be able to, ultimately doing those things raises everybody's, standard. Because while I wasn't trying to like beat everybody else, like, oh man, I'm going to like try to like take their legs out from underneath them or shit talk them or whatever. Like I also didn't understand the value of like truly bringing people with you, because again, I was just so focused on like, okay, well, I'll just run at it with everything that I got. And hopefully, it works out, or hopefully people understand, or hopefully some other people will start picking up the slack. And, a lot of times that doesn't happen. Hope is a horrible strategy,
Totally.
So it's like, we got to have these conversations and reinforce what we need to do as a team and a unit together.
Dude, that's so awesome. There's a spot where you mentioned like, okay, I had a hard time with these, what'd you call them? Like, what's the book? Crucial conversations,
Crucial.
right?
All right. Yeah, I like that.
So crucial conversations, or, just conflict, right? Now you manage a team of over 30 people, and you have to have these conversations daily.
Yep.
Do you remember the first one that you had to have that where you were truly in your head about it, and it finally like it was, a big exhale at the end? But do you remember that first one that was just brutal?
Man, I can't think back to like the first one. I mean, I can still feel the feeling like inside of me where like you work it up in your brain and you think about like all the what if scenarios that are going to happen. But I can't think of like the one conversation where it's like, oh man, this is the turning moment for me. I know that I struggled with it for a long time, and instead of delaying a conversation, indefinitely, like never having it, to then maybe, hey, it's a week or two later, to then it's like, okay, well, I'm going to maybe have that conversation a day or two later. And then now it's like, hey, we're just going to have it in the moment, and it's like, all right, cool. I know how to separate my emotion from it. And again, it's not a tough conversation if it's true and honest, and the intent is, there to like, hey, we're going to get something productive out of this. I've just learned that like it's a lot easier just to have the conversation now.
I've only had one angry Will experience where I've seen you really upset, and the beauty in it is when you were in these like I guess like confrontational situations, your emotion is rooted in that our mission for the brand, whether it be Supplement Superersource or First Form, we were not living up to our potential. We were not living up to our expectations as far as how we like to do things. And so you being upset was only rooted in, we're not doing this up to our standard. And it's not personal at who said what and who told this person this and like who gave the expectation. It was all just, we're not doing this as good as we can do it.
Yeah.
And so, dude, that's just such a great leadership quality, man. And so it's just been fun to watch you do all this over the years. But
I also think that, something you said in regards to, I'm just going to give this a year. That's such a big thing for, what were you, 22 at the time?
Yep. Yeah. 22, 23, right?
When you're 22 years old, a year seems like an
Eternity.
Enormous amount of time.
That's
an
2
enormous
semesters.
amount of time.
Yeah.
And for you to have the thought process of like, I'm going to see this through for a year, and I think that's just, it kind of goes back to, what does Sal say? One foot in front of the other. It's just like, I'm going to just left foot, right foot,
Yep.
I'm just going to take a bite of this and, I'm going to take a big bite of it is what you did in the beginning. And, you know, it's to have that ability to, you know, understand that, like, if I'm going to see this through, I'm going to have to put everything I have into it for this year's time, and then we'll kind of reevaluate at that point. I just feel like a lot of people don't look at things like that. You know?
And I would say, you know, just in conversations again with different individuals on the team, whether they're younger, older, whatever the case may be, I look at that as like, you know, that decision has already been made. And so it actually eliminates a lot of stress, and it can eliminate a lot of doubt and guessing, right? Because it's almost like you've heard, you know, or other people have talked about this before, where it's like signing a contract with yourself. Like, I never did that. Didn't even know that was a thing when I committed personally to a year. But there's different ways to look at it. It's like, it actually simplifies everything that you have going on, and it reduces stress, because it's like, well, I don't have the option to give up. I already committed to a year. So I can either complain about it, or I can, you know, use all of the energy that I have and pour it into moving forward and getting the most out of it. And so, you know, I always looked at it as like, well, no matter what happens, you know, at the end of this year for the reevaluation, you know, phase, it's like, well, if I give it everything that I have, I know that I'll be at least in a better spot than when I started, you know. And that again comes back to just struggling with my weight and unconfidence and all the things. It's like, I don't want to go back to that. So I'm just going to pour everything here. And so that first year, while it feels like forever, you know, it also simplified a lot, that it's like, I have no other option. So it's kind of like the taking quitting off the table, but also, you know, you're not married to it for life. So it's like, hey, you're like in a good gray area per se of like, well, I'm not going backwards, and I don't have to do this for the rest of my life. All I have to do is just give it everything I got for right now. And it just narrowed that focus for me to be able to pour everything into it and not waste a lot of energy with the, all right, well, this month wasn't good. Maybe I should quit. And then you have a good month and you're like, oh man, this is great.
This is great. Yeah,
I'm going to be here forever. And then it's like something goes wrong. And then it's like, oh, well, I don't know. Is this the right decision? Or, oh, I don't know. Like, is it going to be worth it? Doesn't matter. I already committed to a year, and I'm going this direction.
In the 13 years you've worked here, has there been a time where, worked between Supplement Supersource and First Form, has there been a time that was the hardest?
Yeah. I mean, I would say, and I don't know the exact year it was, but it would be right after I came over to First Form. I mean, there was times where I would not sleep.
Oh, I remember those times.
Yeah.
You show up to the gym and you would just be like, I went to sleep 2 hours ago.
Yeah.
Or I didn't sleep at all.
And just how the cadence was, because I came over to First Form to help with the weight loss side of things, because that's a huge passion of mine. And we would send out emails on Monday. And our response rate was like, hey, they are guaranteed going to get a response within 12 hours, right? And I was the only customer service that was answering all of these, you know, weight loss emails. And so we would blast our, you know, email list, and then I would have to stay up from, you know, Monday when I woke up all the way through Tuesday night. If I was lucky, I would get to go to bed. And so I would work and email and do everything I could to stay inside of that time frame for, I think it was over a year. And even inside of there, like later into the week, you know, we were traveling to events and we would be working an event, and it's like, okay, well, I can't sleep because what about this 12-hour, you know, time frame response rate? So I'll just have to stay up again. And, you know, like I did it, you know, and looking back, like I didn't realize that was going to help develop me into the individual that I am today, where now, you know, stressful situations or working hard, it's, you know, quote unquote easier in some sense. But it was the hardest thing of my life. And, you know, like there was times where, I mean, I literally was in tears. Like I was like, I can't take it anymore. I'm going to quit. Like I'm literally going to break, you know, and I had a breakdown, you know, one night where I was like, I can't do it anymore. I physically cannot do it anymore. But I just got through to the next day, you know, and I learned that you have to communicate these things when it gets extremely hard. Right. And, you know, looking back now, I would tell myself, you know, like, hey, well, you know, you asked for this, right? Like you're taking on these opportunities, and I would change my perspective a little bit. But in the moment, I felt like, you know, I had no other options. I felt like, you know, the world was depending on me. I felt like I couldn't communicate these things. And in reality, you know, once I expressed, you know, because no one knew that I was doing that, right? Because I was sleeping at HQ as well, because that's a whole nother story. And I was like hiding my, you know, pillow and my comforter, you know, underneath an empty desk, and like all these things that no one knew was going on. And I was just, again, absorbing it all, trying to give my best for the company and for the mission. And again, learning that of like, okay, well, there is hard work and there is dedication, but then there's also like, you have to communicate these things, because if you don't communicate these things, no one can help you. And so that feeling of like, no one understands. Well, of course they don't understand. you didn't communicate. And I can tell you that your leadership does not want you staying up, pulling all-nighters weeks, every single week for over a year. That's not good for anybody, right? Like, we got to get some resources in here to help. But
during that time, you were also kind of ascending into this position on that side of things where you had a reputation that you were going to be the guy that jumps in the workout. You were going to be the guy that,
Total
goes
yes
to
man.
competitions.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so to do that on top of basically not sleeping very well, it's a lot of pressure. And also at that time, First Form had like a handful of employees. So there wasn't like a lot of other people that you could lean on during that time.
Right.
You have when you get started with, the customer service side of things, you'd already worked in the store for years. Like you had a background with service, but how did those emails and so forth kind of compare to having to work with somebody one-on-one? What were the challenges when it came to trying to create the same kind of culture we had in the store through a screen?
Yeah, I would tell you through a screen, you don't get the same gratification of helping an individual. That's still to this day one of the things that I miss most is, in the stores, you get a chance to like look at the person and truly like, have like the connection and the energy and the vibe
exchange
and the feel, and like, especially even when someone comes in and they're like, dude, I'm down 5 pounds, or I hit a PR on my bench, like you get to celebrate that. And like now, yes, you can celebrate it through technology and stuff, but it's still just not the same. And so even, back then, like that was a big hurdle, because I craved, that fulfillment, right? Because it's like, man, that energizes me. And so, I had to figure out, well, how can I make this, quite honestly, for lack of better words, more fun, right? And, I came into this process of where I would just write every email from the sense of like, how do I make this person smile? Because I got a D in English, I almost failed out of college. That's a whole nother thing. I got a 0.3 grade point average, which is impressive to get a 0.3. But I wasn't good with writing either. So I had to learn that skill of how to articulate my thoughts, my feelings, and energy transfer through that. And so I just simplified it to like, what would this, email look like if this person's going to smile when they read it, right? And I would allow that to fuel me. And I would think about, okay, this person, they're going to be, I could like almost visually see them there reading it, smiling, feeling the transfer of energy this way. And then when I would read it back, I would think about times at the stores of like, okay, I'm envisioning myself like in the store. How am I reading this from a perspective that is like, hey, they're excited or they're upset or whatever. And it would just help me try to communicate a little bit better by, visually using the past experiences and then, parlaying that into the written word, but really just focused on how do I make this person smile? How do I have a little bit more fun with it?
Yeah, the high touch thing is definitely, when you look back on First Form and what set them apart, or what set you guys apart in the supplement industry, it's having a real person communicate with you when nobody was doing that. Such a huge deal, What's the in the time frame that you've worked at First Form, which is basically from inception almost, not totally, but from inception to be a nationwide brand. What's the thing that you think is the biggest change that you've seen?
Oh man, biggest change.
Personally or within the company, Kyle?
Yeah. No, the company, like that you've been a part of, So that could be, anything that, has affected you or has affected the company that's been, cool to see, I would say.
Yeah. That's an interesting question. I hadn't really thought about, that, because I look at a lot of what has happened is like evolving.
Yeah.
Right. And one of the reasons why I'm still here to this day, and even with all the hard days and challenges, is that the mission has never changed. Right. And that's one of the things that I truly appreciate. And while, it's sometimes, we do a little bit better than others, and sometimes we have some hiccups and, things like this and learning curves and, growth and onboarding too many people and all kinds of stuff. But it's like the mission has never, changed. So when I look at what has changed, having the app, the First Form app has been great because literally hundreds of thousands of people we've been able to connect with inside of there with the high touch because, while a lot of companies go more towards the AI side of things, it's like, cool, well, we're going to be here with a real person to help you. And like having that and being able to like see and get the videos back from people and the actual change there has been great. Also just, being able to see us in, more, retail stores, and in more places across the country, just looking at it from a standpoint of like more brand awareness, more opportunities, to help people. But really, like I look back at what we did, in the early days was, doing the community events and doing, CrossFit competitions and being a part of like truly the fitness industry. We just do it a little bit differently now, right? We do it at a bigger scale in some capacity. And so I look at it more as like an evolving thing rather than like, hey, this was, we took this and we shifted this direction. And it's caused a big impact.
Yeah, I don't know if it was, I didn't mean like completely shifted. Like for me, from the outside looking in, Summer Smash has been one of those things where it's like, if you remember, you were at the first Summer Smash and, doing donuts in the middle of a crowd versus like what it's become now where you're seeing, some of the biggest artists in the world performing at it. Yep. I don't remember what Summer Smash it was that I showed up and I was just like, holy shit. I was like, this is way different now. This is like a real deal, concert, basically, festival, I guess. And
the first year Nelly performed, that's probably it.
Dude.
That massive pool and everything that went into it. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, I didn't even know that was happening. And so I was just as shocked as everybody else that was in the crowd. And I mean, I fucking lost it.
Yeah.
I was like, holy smokes. Like, that was a huge moment, obviously, being St. Louis, growing up with Nelly. He was the first CD I bought. A lot of things there.
Dude, for sure.
Sal up on stage
Country Grammar,
rapping.
dude.
Wasn't that year?
Yeah, that was.
He was doing the Humpty dance.
Yeah, those good times.
You got, like, there's so much to unpack with some of the things that you've said to this point because you say them in such a manner that, it's just like you felt like, you had no other way of really doing it at the time. But it's just so extraordinary. In a team environment, I was like somebody I can say for myself that had a very much like a more of a selfish attitude as a young person.
No.
And the most.
Really?
Oh yeah. And so to watch a guy be so selfless, it made me have so many like shit feelings towards Will where I'd be like, dude, everybody imagine if you're listening right now.
He's not that cool.
Imagine you are in class and you stayed up too late the night before playing video games and you like did not get the homework done. And nobody is saying a word, and you are in your head getting away with it, and you're psyched, and you're in the back of class trying to hide. And then that motherfucker, sorry for cursing, raises his hand in the front row, and he's like, hey, do you want us to turn in that assignment you gave us? And we're all like throwing paper at him, like, what are you doing, dude? Like we were about to get away with it. And Will is just that guy. He's sitting in the front row. He's 100% bought in. He's there to learn. He's not there for any other reason. And so he raises his hand and he's like, I thought we were doing this.
He's made a post like this, I believe.
Have you?
Yeah.
Maybe. I mean, like you
be
did,
that guy?
Well, be that
guy.
Don't let him take credit. I told him this about your be that guy post on the way here. Anyways.
That's true.
Don't let him steal that thunder.
I'm not as good on the social medias as Jeff.
Dude, I just appreciated the hell out of that post because I try to explain that to our young people. They don't understand. It's like, guys, when you said you would commit for a year, right? You sign on, you say, I'm going to commit to this for a year. I try to tell everybody, you're never going to figure out who you are or if you really even like something. The classic quitter's phrase when they leave a job, it just wasn't for me. It just wasn't for me. And I say to them, how do you ever know if anything's for you if you don't really give it your all? You don't really, it's such a cop-out. Yep. And so when I watch, you give it your absolute all, truly go all in, because if I'm going to be here, why not be my best, right? Why not get the most out of this and truly adopt that at such a young age? All the while knowing that other people, it's going to rub them the wrong way because you're forcing them to raise the bar. You're raising the standard for everybody around you, even though that wasn't your intent. You're just really buying into the mission all the way. Yep. And so to watch you do that and have other people around you try to tear you down because you're forcing them to work harder, kind of crabs in the bucket analogy there. Can you remember a time in where it was the most difficult because as a youth, you were trying to make everybody happy. You wanted to be well liked. But by trying harder and being a golden boy, if you will, in those moments, right, you're going to definitely piss some people off. Yep. How did you handle that?
Man, that was tough. There was, I can think very specifically of one individual who I looked up to a lot.
They don't work here anymore, do they?
One does.
Okay.
One does. And I remember he pulled me aside, and it was outside of Green Park. And he's like, dude, you got to slow down. He's like, you'll never make it. You're going to burn out. He's like, it's not physically possible to keep running at that pace. And here was this guy that like I just really looked up to. And I was like, well, maybe he's right, But but, you know, kind of working through that, because at the time I didn't know what to say. And I remember that feeling of like, oh man, like there's a pit in my stomach. But I went home. It was on a Friday, you know, and worked through the weekend, did my normal, you know, stuff. And I remember thinking back of like, Andy made a post similar around that time of like, you have to look at the people's life, you know, and see if that's the life that you want, if you're going to listen to their recommendation. And it was like a really well timed. It wasn't like the exact same day, like, oh, right after the moment. But I remember that post helped me out because it changed my perspective. Because I also used to like, you know, worry about what my family thought or different things and like all
Dude,
that
one
stuff.
of Andy's best posts, honestly.
Yeah.
Because it totally makes you look at things in it gives you better perspective to taking advice. It narrows the people you take
For sure.
advice down
Well,
to
we're all
like
we're all
nothing.
raised very similarly, where you're going to follow your family's advice,
Yeah.
or follow the the person in the next position in front of you's
Correct.
advice, and you're always told to listen to your superiors, etc. And so it just was a total perspective shift to say, hey, in the long game, it's just trade. Who do you want to trade places with?
Yeah.
Sorry, please continue.
Yeah. And so I remember that post and I remember thinking through it and I was like, you know what? I respect this guy because he helped train me in a lot of different things, took me to a lot of events, you know, like I had been in the company for quite a few years before me. And I was like, cool, I respect him. I appreciate him. But quite honestly, like, I don't want his life. You know, I looked at his life. I looked at his habits. I looked at like what he was doing. And it's like, that's not what I want. You know, I'm going past that, you know, and to the idea of like, I don't care how many people are in front of me. I'm going to earn, you know, my seat in the bus, right? Because one of the things that Andy brought up in the interview that I never forgotten, still haven't forgotten, is that he said, if you join this company, it is like joining a rocket ship. Now, what seat you have on that rocket ship is 100% up to you. And I was like, cool, I can get down with that. And he's like, it doesn't matter how long anyone's been here. It doesn't matter what their skill set is. If you want a seat on the rocket ship, you can have any seat that you want, but you're going to have to work for it. And so again, thinking back to even that, it's like, well, I don't care what seat this guy wants, you know, like I'm moving past that. I'm not going to listen to his direct advice and I'm going to run my game plan, which was, again, continue to just pour everything that I had into it. Because while I committed to that first year, for like, I think the first 5 or 6 years, I just kept committing 1 year at a time, you know, and just kept attacking it that way.
You have I got a really good one, man. And I want to make sure that, this question is not to like talk shit or it's not to be negative. It's simply that
It's going to be talking shit.
no, it's that, dude, it's just one of those things where as a kid growing up, you always had this kind of like idealistic viewpoint. And I shouldn't say you always do. It's my personal belief. But when young people are young and they're being critiqued every day in the way that they work because they're trying to become great at something, you're getting coached constantly by people. And at times you look at your leaders and you say, well, I can critique the shit out of you too. And you say to yourself, well, I see you do this. I see you do that. I saw you be lazy over here, over there. And you don't want to hear it sometimes when they're breaking you down, when you feel like, they're not following the same advice they're giving you,
For sure.
And has there ever, like to this point, we've talked about a lot of things where you personally have worked through something difficult that was just difficult, that you were served, if you will. But I want to go over a time where it would be very easy for you to lose belief, which if there's all the core values that we have in this company, you exemplify belief, and the word believe is just the value. But I think you exemplify that the absolute best. And I think that you're the tip of the spear when it comes to that for other people to follow. Can you talk about a time where you truly, and I want you to get descriptive on what happened that would actually shake Will Grumke's belief and how you got through that moment?
Yeah. The second time that I wanted to quit. Okay. There's a saying that J.P. Donnell told me a long time ago, is that fatigue makes a coward out of all of us. And I look at where I was in my life. So, I'd been at First Form for a little bit, had gotten through the sleepless nights, things like that. However, the work, never stops, right? And it's a constant thing and a constant battle. And when you think and you care so much about a mission, and you start, developing your ideas of like how we should do things, it was just got to a situation where, there was some situations handled that like, I felt that I would have done it differently. And I was like, I don't know about that. I think we should do this, this, and this. And even, in those moments, it's not like I gave up all hope or gave up, all belief. But I had to really reflect again and think about, okay, well, Will, you don't get to make every decision, right? And if you're going to be a part of this team, right, like we have to work as a team. So while you maybe don't like this one decision, right, or this one direction, it is your job, if you're going to be on this team, to support that decision and to support that to the best of your ability. And if you forever, feel, or if at any point you feel that you can't support that decision, well, then you need to just remove yourself from the team, because the team and the mission is ultimately what's going to have to come first. And so for me, just kind of going back through that, and then, the idea of fatigue makes a coward out of all of us, removing my emotion and self-analyzing, for myself of like, okay, is it really as big as a deal as you're making it? Or are you just exhausted? Are you just tired? Because you're pouring so much into this and you want it to be worthwhile, and you're literally investing your life into this, to grow this, to build this. So yeah, you take it personal, and I think we can all relate, like when you're tired, or maybe it's with a significant other, like just different things kind of set you off, differently than how they would if you had a great night of sleep and you were perfectly refreshed or jacked up on caffeine or whatever, right? And so I think it was a combination of, pouring everything that I had into it, and feeling that like my opinion didn't matter, or that I had no say, and that something was just being forced and I wasn't being, listened to, and overinflating how much I should be listened to, because again, I don't get to make all the decisions, but I should, support all of the decisions, or I need to remove myself from the team. And so that was just kind of a moment, for me.
Humility.
I mean,
Like,
how
you
long?
gotta have a little bit of humility.
How long
in
was that window for you? Because what you just talked about is an extremely mature way to handle a very difficult situation. And, I will be the first to say that when I've been in situations like that, it would take me at least, a couple weeks of kicking and screaming and trying to talk shit to anybody who would listen to me before finally someone would set me straight, if you will.
Yeah.
And I would not handle that very well, and that was part of my own immaturity and growth for me. But how long did that window last for you, where you finally were like, all right, if I'm going to be on this team, then I have to be a team player, and this is what a team player looks like?
Yeah, I would say probably a couple weeks.
Yeah.
And something, that I've never struggled with is like the shit talking behind someone's back. Like that. Again, I always just internalized things. And so for me, I just wore it, and just again like would almost be in tears, and like just the world is coming down on top of me. No one understands, and like I would just almost implode internally. But it affected my attitude probably for a couple weeks. You'd like to think that, hey, I managed it well and no one knew, or whatever the case may be. But it's a situation that you kind of work through, and I would say probably a couple weeks.
Is that in that ability to the root of you not wanting to speak up? Is that you having a lot of pride, for example, and saying that like I feel like I shouldn't have to say this, or is it I don't want to be a burden? Is there
avoidance of conflict?
Right. It's like,
Yeah.
there's two ways that you can, there's probably a third way. I'm just saying that's usually one of those two. Where do you think that came from?
No, I would say it's back to the lack of confidence and don't want to be a burden. It's just deep seated inside of me that I still battle with it at times, where it's like, are you valuable? Like, do you matter? And a lot of those things that, still can run through my brain every now and again. I'm obviously a lot better at overcoming those things. But even in those moments, it's like, it's not from, oh, well, I shouldn't have to say this. It's like, again, I just not a confidence or not courageous enough at the time, to say it or want to say it or be able to go through the conversation. So I just would fall back to old ways of not bringing it up.
Yeah, man, it's so important, because there's just so many people, especially within our company, that when you're young and you see people who've been around longer, et cetera, there are so many people that would look to you, man, and especially that I know that work for us right now that really are inspired by you and really respect you on a very high level. They would think like, man, I can't imagine ever a time where, Will was lacking confidence. Yeah. You know what I mean? Especially with how hard you work, but it's just everyone needs to see how human everybody is, and those feelings happen for everybody. It's just about how you react to them. You know what I mean? It's, as you would say, I think is, it's all about choices and just making the next best choice you can make.
You also said, something that I picked up on, that you said, the work never stops, right? In our job, a lot of times you get people, or this is actually in most jobs, you get people that come into the job, they get excited, and then reality sets in, and that excitement starts to fade. And that
uninformed optimism to informed pessimism.
Yeah, and that usually happens within a year. But then once you get through that, then you kind of go into this phase where you're like, I can do this for a while, right? But then you kind of hit that point where it's like you're 5 years into something and you kind of look around and you're like, holy shit, this really actually just never stops. And that's when you lose a lot of people too. How do you, in the beginning, you said you did the 1 year, 1 year, 1 year. How do you deal with that now? Like, how do you, I don't want to say balance, because you're not a balanced guy in a lot of different ways, but there is balance for everybody, and your balance, might look different than other people's, but you got to have some balance in your life. How do you manage that now?
Yeah, well, first, just even thinking back to the younger side of things, something that I've learned is, a lot of stress or angst comes from the difference between expectation and reality, right? And so especially with coaching and developing a lot of individuals, they expect that it's going to go like X, Y, and Z, right? And so then when it's not, they become stressed because that's not the reality. So if we can help paint a better picture and truly lay out what it looks like, then get the expectation more aligned with reality, a lot of that stress disappears because it's like, hey, well, it's supposed to be this way. Mm-hmm. So I'm not weird. It's not hard. It's not different for me. Like, this is literally what it is, So I think that helps. But then, the other side is like, as you advance, and you start thinking about it, one, I like to always, look at, okay, well, the time is going to pass either way, right? And where am I going to be, right? Because as hard as it is, like, we have a lot of great opportunities here. I mean, we have an awesome facility. Even before we had an awesome facility, it's like, hey, we were working out of our cars. So it's not necessarily the facility. So when I say that, it's like the group that you get to be around in a place that you enjoy because of the energy and the environment, where it's like, I look at where my, aunts and uncles work, or I listen to where my friends are at, or how they have to show up on a day-to-day basis or whatever. And quite honestly, it's not what I would want to do, right? And it's not how I would want to have to live my life every single day. And so for me, understanding that, like, there's a lot of unspoken necessarily benefits, or things outside of just pay that add to the value of what you get from, being on the team that, has fulfilled me up to this point. And then the second part of that is I, coach a lot of people when they're early on, is to remember the wins, right? And I literally have a folder in my phone. I have one on my computer, and it's called, so the one on my computer is When It Gets Tough, right? And in my phone, I forgot what it's called, but it's just screenshots of nice messages that people have sent that are about the impact that I've made in their life, or something that I have said that has coached them and helped them. And so again, when I start thinking about, 5 years, like, well, what's it going to be like in another 5 years or 10 years? Or am I really going to have to do this for 20 years or whatever it is? I can look back at those things, When It Gets Tough folder, or, in my phone, and look at, like, hey, but at least I get to do this, right? And so again, for me at least, I've always wanted to be valuable, right? And again, going from unconfident to where I'm at now, like, I want to make an impact. I can feel it inside of me. And so when my perspective, back to the first part, gets off, and I forget that, like, hey, you have a great opportunity to be valuable if you continue to show up and do the best that you can, that value will only go further in the future. But if I lose that perspective, right, then that's when the stress comes in, because I start thinking about, oh, well, think about all the time, or think about all of this, because there's no quote unquote value at the end of it. And so for me, it's just learning to, constantly, like, make sure that I have the right perspective. And a simple thing of screenshotting stuff and saving it is where you can look at it, is helped me tremendously with, staying on the path as I've progressed,
recharge
year. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
You put this, the first part I want to bring back to what you said is the expectation versus reality, right? One of my favorite quotes is the ending of any relationship is usually due to an unmet expectation. And when we're talking about, being a part of Andy speaking about the vision of what is to come for these companies, and it not being a reality yet, and you're going through, the hardest times of your life, the hardest you've ever worked, it's way more than anybody in your peer group has done. And this is anything I'm saying you can edit, but I feel like this has just been my reality throughout the whole situation. Is you're going through your early 20s and you're just working harder than everybody else Everybody that you grew up with is watching you leave early so you can go get something else done. And everybody's just like, man, they don't pay you enough. Like, why are they, all that doubt. And so I've watched and listened to you say different things that you were working towards over the years. And some of those things have happened for you, but some of them have not. And so I want to go into that, expectation versus reality. I'll never forget, we were at not a Billy G's, but what's the one that starts with an H? What's the other one?
Helen's?
Helen's. We're at Helen Fitzgerald's, and it's like a late night. Everybody's talking, and you're at the bar, and you're like, man, what are you gonna do? Well, you're like, well, I'm gonna be the CEO of Carbon Fire. You're like, I'm for sure gonna be the CEO of Carbon Fire, and it's just like you had this unbridled belief in those moments. And so as the world changed, and as the company changes, and of course we evolve, you didn't get that expectation, not to this point, right? What did you do?
Still possible.
Still very possible.
He's like, don't care.
Yeah. But if I ask you today, I would say that's not what you're going to say as far as what you want to do.
Right.
And so with that being said, talk about a time, because again, you've gotten so far in a career that many people find the most challenging because of the high standards, because of the accountability, because we truly want to see you hit your potential. Sometimes it's hard for the ego, right? And so throughout this process, can you think of a time in your career where the expectation just for sure wasn't what you expected and how you worked through that?
Yeah. Man. I don't know. I'd have to really think about like an exact time. But what I can tell you,
there was I could just give you an example.
Yeah.
I once was told like I'm going to be moving
I knew this
from
was coming.
Springfield.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, dude. I mean, like it was just the hardest thing I'd ever went through, and I didn't handle it well, but I stuck around. But I was told I was going to move from Springfield back to St. Louis. I was going to work with First Form and Sal. I was going to be a sales rep, blah, 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 blah. And, I said I needed to get ready and be ready in 90 days. And I got the 90-day call from Andy, and I was like, oh, man, here we go. I'm moving, I've like been down in Springfield for like 6 years. All my friends had moved away. I'm just like living work, right, every day. And he's like, we're going to have to take Kyle. And I was like, wait, what? I thought this was my big opportunity, Instead, he's like, no, you got to stay in Springfield. We got a guy who's being a pest up in St. Louis that we need Kyle to help. And he's our best guy right now. We don't want to make a lateral move for you. We want you to have a big move whenever we move you, but it's not happening now. So I had to wait 2 more years. And those 2 years were very, very difficult. You know what I mean? And I didn't handle them well. But all that to be said, can you think of a time maybe where either it just didn't go as planned, you know what I mean? And you had to have some resilience to you.
Yeah. I would think, obviously, Carbon Fire, more specifically, Drew Skiles and I, we were like, all right, 2017, this is happening, right? And again, it comes back to the idea of like, I want to be valuable, right? And I could run that. I could do that, right? Looking back, I had no business trying to run a brand or anything at 2017. But anyway, something that's taught me a lot, I would say outside of work that I think I've carried into work, is I don't put a whole lot of expectation into things. And what I mean by that is lost relationships, where I really truly thought that like, oh man, this is going to be, the one, or this is it. And then also even things of like buying a house, right? Or going after a car that I wanted, where I would put so much emotion into it and so much desire into it that then when it didn't happen, it would wreck me, right? And so I think in my career, because I can't really think of a time where it's like, man, I'm expecting that this is going to happen by X date, that it like wrecked me the same way, because I think I'd had enough life experiences to where it's like, man, if you put the emotion out in front of yourself like that, like, dude, if it doesn't come through, like you're kind of screwed.
Yeah, setting yourself up.
And that goes back to the idea of being able to control, my emotions better. Because I used to not be able to. And so, for me, I don't have like a set expectation, because even back to the point of like being the yes man, I've never, besides, saying like, hey, I want to run, or, Carbon Fire at the time, but really it was like, I want to be valuable. I want to run a company.
Yeah, you were looking at where can I, be the most valuable in the future.
And so I'm running at the idea of that. But like, ultimately, I don't really care if it's like necessarily that, but I want to work my way to the top of something, that is meaningful. And so with that, I've been a yes man, as far as like Sal's moved me from customer service to then I was, helping out in the Legionnaire team. And then I was co-leading the Legionnaire team. And then, Jason taught me how to do all the Facebook, advertising and monitoring and doing all of that. And then I've been on the media team and overseeing the warehouse. And like, I've moved to every realm of the business in some capacity, as Sal has asked me to go learn this or go do this, or, hey, I need your help over here, or, hey, I need some leadership over here. And so he's plugged me in. So like, again, my expectation outside of just, I want to be valuable, hasn't ever really, felt like it's been taken away from me in a career standpoint. Outside of a career, again, relationships, home, and a car, that's where I learned that, like, bro, you got to control your emotion going into it, because if it doesn't happen, it's going to wreck you on the backside.
Totally.
How do you navigate that? You're a leader now, right? So it's not just you that has to think about those things. How do you navigate that with your team, considering that, external things are mostly what young people are motivated by?
Yeah. So I think, and even back to the idea of the vision board, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I am all for vision boards, right? Like, you should have things on your vision board, okay, that, like, I am going to drive that. I'm going to be in that. They should be material things, right? Like, sometimes people, they're like too vague on the vision. It's like, no. What are you physically going to be wearing? What are you going to drive? Where are you going to live? What are these things, okay? But then teaching them that, like, okay, to earn that, it is all about creating value, right? It's not about the actual material thing, right? But if you are to drive that car or live in that house or have that lifestyle, you are going to have to create value in who you are as an individual and impact in the world. And so then reverse engineering that back down of, like, okay, well, how do we start doing that right now? Okay. Well, the number one thing that you can do, right? Because, growth and opportunity, right? It's not just going to come out of nowhere. So as a team member, your fastest way to earn anything on that board is to be excellent at your job, right? To excel at your job, to give an awesome customer experience. Because when you do that, the company will grow, right? Because there will be positive word of mouth, there will be referrals, there will be repeat business. And as the company is getting repeat business, and as the company is getting new people in, and as the company is growing, all of our opportunities grow. So if you want that, it's not because we have to take it from someplace else and, like, now someone else can't have it. You have to create additional value in your role to force the company to grow. And so being able to, like, kind of talk through it in that sense of, like, while yes, the company is now 300 and something employees and a lot bigger than it was back in the day, people still have almost, I can't say the same amount of control, but almost the same amount of control over their career and their destiny and their opportunity as it was when it was 8 people, right? Because it's all about excelling in your role. It's about growing the company. And even if, your specific channel or role or whatever, like, it has to change for you to grow and evolve and move, cool. That's perfectly fine as well. But it's creating, the vision board through creating the value in your day-to-day task is how we kind of talk about it.
Yeah. And moving from the flexibility is the value a lot of times in that, being able to quickly learn a new job and move it to a new department, for a lot of people, that's super valuable for a company.
Yes. And also being able to teach people how to be valuable in the role that you're in.
Yeah.
And, like, to me, that's leadership, right? Like, because anybody can be a manager, right? There's a huge difference between manager and leader, right? A manager, like, you're just getting tasks done, right? Like, you're just making sure that the status quo is happening, right? But leadership is about the development, right? And about, helping people, really lean into more of their potential. So again, the entire team and the entire unit goes up. And, there's a million books on leadership in all different kinds of ways, stuff like that. But to the point of the idea of, like, it comes back to leading by example is the very first thing that you have to be doing, so that when we are having those conversations with individuals and talking about, hey, man, if you do the work and you focus on personal development and you're investing in yourself, it will be worth it. Like, I look at myself as, like, I am that example for them. Like, that's the truth. And it's like, so I'm very comfortable having these conversations of, like, dude, I get it. I don't care how stressed you are. I don't care how much you're working. I've been there. I already know that. But I can promise you, if you stick to this and you persevere through it and we work on these skills, you can build that vision board. You can build that. You can do that, right? And I think at times, different people, they let their own foot off the gas and stuff, to where then it's like, all right, you've kind of slipped back into the manager role rather than the leader role.
Mm-hmm. And I think with the way that you've been able to do this over the years and show time and time again, how to persevere, how to get through these tough times, show grit, resilience, they can make you unrelatable at times. And so, now when you've put yourself in a stratosphere where it's very hard to relate with your young people, are you able, I guess, what strategy or tactic do you use to try to make people understand, like, I promise it was just as hard for me, if not much harder?
Yeah. So I was talking to Sal about this yesterday. Or maybe last weekend, actually. And I've gone through, like, I'll say kind of like seasons of this, okay? In the beginning, it's like, all right, we already talked about it. I wouldn't say anything. I would just hope that people would follow me, right? or, pick up on the example and, we'd all move better together moving forward. But, then I got to the point of like trying to, explain it to people. Right. And I would just almost want to like shake people and be like, hey, no, for real. You have to listen to me. Like, I can promise you it will be worth it. I promise you. But then I realized that took so much energy, right? Mental energy, because like, I truly understand that like, I'm no one special, from the idea of like, I literally have just worked at it and I have been committed to working more and harder than anybody else because I didn't have the skills. I didn't have the confidence. So like, I know that people can do it. Like, and there's people that are at better starting points than me that can do way more in the same amount of time than what I've done. But they have to be willing to go through that process. And so like, I would just want to like shake people. I'm like, bro, you got this. And now I don't waste my energy with that, right? I feel that I have an obligation to share, which is why on the podcast, right? And I've stopped, saying no to a lot of opportunities to share, and saying yes to more because if it helps one person, right? Or if it helps a few people go a little bit further, cool. That's all I can do. All I can do is continue to work on myself, continue to, pursue my best, life and version of myself. And then I don't have the additional stress or anxiety on myself of like trying to force people to listen.
Yeah.
They're either
dragging them to the,
that's the truth.
They're either going to get it or not. And it's like, man, I will help anybody until I'm blue in the face. But if they're not helping themselves, like I'm not going to spend
you
my
can't
time.
compromise yourself, to try and like,
Go ahead.
You can't compromise yourself to try and drag somebody that's just not going to.
Yeah. You
can't
learn some boundaries
too
there,
heavy.
I've had to learn that lesson.
Yeah. But you're in a spot where, I want to give you the natural reaction to most human nature behavior, which would be like the self-sabotage, right? And it's really just self-preservation. They don't want to have to really face the obvious truth of like, you're saying, I know you can do this. I know you can do this. And they want to say back, but what if it doesn't work out for me, right? What if I do all this work, and it doesn't, and I don't get the shiny object or the promotion or the raise that I was expecting. And so that conditional, human nature. I mean, everybody's going to be thinking it. What do I do with those? What do I do with those thoughts as a young person? If someone's saying, "Hey, I need you to go all in so you can really see what this is about," and they're saying, "Yeah, but what if I work that hard for somebody else and then I don't get anything out of it?" There are people that will leave our company and say, literally, like, "I poured my heart and soul in there for years, and what do I have to show for it?" And they really have that attitude. What would you say to those kind of people?
Yeah, a couple different things here. So I got three things. I got to compartmentalize my thoughts. I got a lot to say on this. One, you're not going to be any worse off, right? Or at least that was what was true for me. It's like, okay, so what? You go all in, right? And you give it everything that you got. Like, in my opinion, I was already starting from zero. So it's like, I'm trying to protect a life that like I don't even want. I'm unhappy. I don't look the way that I want. I don't feel the way that I want. Like, I don't feel that I have control over my life. So like, what am I trying to protect? Like, there's literally only one option of improving. And so that was, sobering for me in the sense of like, all right, well, I'm not going to lose anything here. Secondarily, thinking about to the idea of like, what if I pour all my, this into it and I don't get anything out of it and everyone else, benefits from that. I look at that as like, again, you don't have to be here for the entire, life cycle, right? Like, you don't have to spend 10, 20, 30 years here, but the time is going to pass one way or the other. Right. And so, even if, you feel that way down the road, right. Or even if, your boss, quote unquote, turns out to be that way, well, that could be there at any job. Right. So thinking that like, hey, this is the perfect job for me, or I'll stay here forever, or whatever the case may be, like, there's a lot of companies that are out there. Right. And so just thinking that you're maybe, quote unquote, not valued here. Well, who says that you're going to be any more valued at the other place, right? And so, again, for me, I look at that from a standpoint of like, all right, we get so ingrained with like where we're at and almost, justifying how we feel rather than truly comparing it to what else is out there. And most people, especially as, the younger generation comes up and we hire a lot of people, it's their first time job. They have no experience anyplace else. They have no idea what it's like. And I can tell you that, like, from my limited perspective in other places in the, teaching profession and construction and stuff like that, like, it is way better here. And we see that time and time again of like where people will leave and then they come back or they want to come back, and it's like, hey, look, so if you don't have experience at another place, one, again, your opinion on the matter doesn't really matter. It's all just theory. It's not through experience. So helping people, understand that. And then really, I would say the book that has helped change my mentality the most is The Magic of Thinking Big. It's the number one book that I recommend to people because, again, going from where I was at to where I am now was a long process for me. I read that book every single year for the first 7 years, multiple times in a year out of the gate, just trying to force enough of a different perspective, different information, more hope, more positivity into my brain that I just would read it. I would listen to it over and over again. And it's The Magic of Thinking Big by David Schwartz. I literally will not recommend another book to somebody if they haven't read that book first. People will hit me up like, hey, what about this? I'm like, no. Read this book first because for me, it has been a foundational thing that has helped me. And when you read through that, I think any of maybe the doubt or the disbelief or whatever, it's a lot easier to overcome those things because you have a more solid framework of thinking about, okay, well, how do I think past just this one situation, this one scenario, this one emotion that I'm feeling now, and ultimately delay the gratification to where I want to get, down the road.
That's beautiful, man. We got time for one more question.
Okay.
And I want to go a more wholesome route. But we talked about balance earlier.
Yeah.
And in order to be extraordinary, right, you have to be the opposite of ordinary, And so it's like you're someone who is like, you're not concerned how other people are living their life. You simply just see what you're asking. I mean, to this point, it feels that you look at what you want and you make sure that your actions are in as best of alignment as you possibly can make them happen like that. You got to a certain point in your life where maybe what got you here isn't going to get you there, and you met a good woman, So I'm so happy for you. You're happily married now. Yep. Shout out Darcy. What has Darcy done for you personally to elevate you as a man?
Unwavering belief. Like truly believing in me. And, I would say seeing the value in me. And it's been awesome. And, I don't tell her nearly enough, and I try to tell her all the time. But just to have that support system, because I know that I can be tough to live with or be around at times because how I choose to live my life. But she truly allows me to be the best version of myself. And, even when we started dating and, things like that, I was like, for those that don't know, I'll just tell the story here. She worked at First Form, and I'm not going to be the type of individual that is, do as I say, not as I do. And I was like, for us to even go on a date, you have to leave the company. Like, I'm not going to go on a date with you. Well, we didn't kiss. We didn't do a thing until she left the company. And, there was a lot of conversations. And I remember, sitting at the bar out in Washington, Missouri, when we, made the decision. And really, it was her decision. And she had to take a chance on me. And she had to believe even before there was anything to believe in, because it was dating. It wasn't like we were getting married. And she walked away from a career, and, we started dating and worked together and, got engaged. And now almost 1 year, married, coming up. But from day one, she's believed in me, and her actions have supported that every single day up to this point. And, there's definitely times where I think she questions, why I push so hard in certain areas. But I like to think that my actions show that, like, I'm not wasting time. I don't get up at 3 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the morning because I don't want to be in bed with you or I don't want to, sleep a little extra. It's because I know where I'm trying to get us as a family and how I want to protect and provide in the future for us and for our kids. And I'm not willing to compromise that for anybody. And, she's been along for the ride from the very beginning, and she does a fantastic job, supporting me. And yeah, so it's the unwavering belief since the very beginning.
Love that, dude.
Most important decision you can make in life, dude.
Yeah,
right there. It's you have the wrong partner, you end up going down a bad path. So.
I want to bring that back to the balance too, because for so many, like we were talking about, just you can feel unrelatable to others at times. I just want to shout out,
dude. Everybody runs for 48 hours straight at some point.
Whatever
the hell he did.
I just want to say we've been able to get through an entire Will Grumke podcast and not mention that he's ran 100 miles in one.
You can't even talk about all the crazy shit he's
Will
done.
Goggins. But dude, about balance, and I say balance because it's like, hey, you can be this alien that people think there's, no one else can do it that way, etc. And, well, that, where's his balance? And it's like, well, think about, how you're pouring into having a loving marriage and a loving relationship, and the amount that, I'm not doing these extra, runs. I'm not waking up this early so I can run from, the life that other people have. It's so that I can be the absolute best I can be as far as providing and providing security, et cetera, for your family and your future family. And it's like, it's just very inspiring, man. And so super honored to know you. We love you, man. And
love you, buddy.
Thanks for taking the time to sit down with us.
Thank you so much for coming on, man.
So happy for you.
For anybody who may not follow Will, you should definitely follow him on social media. Give him everybody your social media.
He's a way better follow than us. So make sure to follow. So make sure you follow.
If you
Will.
follow me, I'm sorry. Yeah. What are you doing?
You'll get a life update once every 3 months from Kyle. So anyways, man, thanks again for your time. What's your Instagram for the people that are listening?
So it's just my name, Will Grumke. So WILLGRUMKE.
Cool, man.
Love, man.
Thank
Appreciate
you again for being on, buddy.
Yep. Thank you, guys.